April 1865. The war was nearly over, but one letter, never delivered, could have changed everything. It spoke of betrayal, danger, and a name history would never forget. But the man who wrote it vanished, and the president it was meant for never saw a word. The pen scratched against the paper, like a whisper, slow, careful, deliberate. In the dim light of a flickering oil lamp, Elias Finch bent over the desk, his hand trembling slightly, not with fear but urgency. The room smelled of tobacco, candle wax, and something older, something forgotten. He paused once to glance out the window, where snow was gathering quietly across the rooftops of Washington, D.C. It was March 1865. The war was nearly over, but something darker was coming. Elias had never considered himself a brave man. He was a clerk, a quiet observer in the office of military telegraphs, a man who listened more than he spoke. But tonight, what he had heard could not be ignored. His fingers, stiff from cold and shock, moved again. He wrote every word with a sense of finality, as though he were chiseling truth into stone. Mr. President, the letter began, there is a plot, and it comes not from the Confederacy, but from within these walls. The ink dried faster than he could think. He folded the letter, sealed it with wax, and stamped it with the mark of the War Department. His breath fogged in the freezing air as he stepped outside, holding history in his hand. He did not know if it would be read. He only knew that it had to be delivered. The corridors of the War Department were eerily quiet that night, broken only by the occasional clink of boots and the low murmur of telegraph operators behind closed doors. Elias moved quickly but cautiously, the letter burning against his chest like a secret. His instincts told him he was already being watched. He wasn't wrong. From behind a heavy column, a tall man in a dark greatcoat watched him. He was nameless, faceless in the dim corridor, just another shadow. But his eyes followed Elias with precision, like a hawk waiting for its moment. Elias had passed him once in the hallway during a transfer. The man had no title, but always seemed to know everyone else's. As Elias approached the exit, he made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He turned toward the back stairwell instead of the front. The stranger moved too, but not fast enough to stop him. Outside, the snow was deeper, thicker. Elias ducked into an alley behind the building, his boots slipping slightly. He wasn't delivering the letter through official channels anymore. He didn't trust them. He'd go directly to the executive mansion, personally. But as he turned the final corner toward the carriage stop, a gloved hand seized his shoulder. "You're out late, Mr. Finch." Elias froze. So did the air. By morning, Elias Finch was gone. His neighbors at the boarding house said they hadn't seen him return. His bed was unslept in, his coat was missing, and his ink bottle had tipped over onto a blank page. No one raised an alarm, not at first. Men disappeared often during war. Some ran. Others were taken. Most people simply forgot. And Elias, for all his careful note-taking and quiet habits, wasn't the kind of man whose absence caused noise. But one man noticed. Samuel Whitaker, a junior telegraph assistant and Elias's only real friend, sat at his own desk that morning frowning over a cup of weak coffee. Elias had promised to show him something. A letter. Something important. But now there was no Elias, no letter, and no explanation. Samuel thought going to police, but there were no signs of a struggle. And in Washington, you didn't accuse shadows without proof. Instead, he did something simple. He went to Elias's desk. It had already been cleaned. Too clean. The ledgers were missing. His drawer was empty. A faint outline remained on the blotter, where a sealed envelope had once rested. But there was nothing now, just silence. And Samuel, for the first time, felt something more than confusion. He felt fear. At the White House, Abraham Lincoln sat with weary eyes and callous fingers, signing the final measures of a nation still bleeding. The war was nearly over, but his mind was restless. Threats had grown more personal, more frequent. Letters arrived daily, some kind, others venomous. One in particular was expected, but it never came. On the third morning of Elias's disappearance, Mary Todd asked her husband why he looked so troubled. He said it was a feeling he couldn't shake, like something important had passed him by, unnoticed. He spoke of a dream he'd had, a coffin in the East Room, a nation in mourning. Mary scolded him for speaking such things aloud, especially after what had happened to their son Willie. But Lincoln simply nodded. He didn't believe in omens until lately. In the War Department, no one mentioned Elias's name again, at least not openly. But the man in the greatcoat did. He handed a different letter to a contact that day, one with different wording, a different sender, and no warning at all. It said the president was safe, that all threats were exaggerated. Lincoln would read it later and feel no comfort, because truth had never reached him. Samuel Whitaker couldn't sleep. The thought of Elias's disappearance gnawed at him like a rat under floorboards. He had seen too many things in the telegraph office: coded messages, intercepted orders, whispers that passed as news. But none of it had ever felt personal. Now it did. He began quietly asking around, mostly at night, in taverns where government men talked too much after whiskey. He heard things, hints, mentions of a letter that never reached its destination, and a clerk who asked too many questions. Then one night, he found something that made his blood run cold. In the lining of Elias's coat, left behind at the tailor's shop, was a tiny fragment of parchment, not enough to read in full. Just 4 words: kill him before. The ink was smeared, the paper torn, but it was enough. Samuel folded it carefully and placed it in a book, hiding it in the floorboards beneath his bed. He didn't know it yet, but that scrap would become the last piece of truth in a story no one wanted told. And he had just inherited it. He had no name, not one that could be found on any payroll or registry. But he had many titles whispered in corners: the ghost of Treasury Lane, the president's shadow. To most, he was just the watcher. He operated in quiet corridors, behind curtained doors and ink-stained files. His orders never arrived on paper, but through nods, glances, and gloves held too tightly. Officially, he worked under the Department of Military Intelligence. Unofficially, he answered to no one but himself, and perhaps someone even higher. On the night Elias disappeared, the watcher filed no report. He didn't need to. His job wasn't to tell what happened. His job was to ensure no one else could. He sat in a private chamber beneath the Capitol that morning, reading a list of names. One was circled in red: Samuel Whitaker. The young telegraph assistant had been asking questions. Too many. The watcher leaned back, fingers interlaced, as he whispered to his aide, "We have another spark. Snuff it before it burns." Then he poured a fresh cup of tea. War was ending, but another conflict had begun. The War of Secrets, and he intended to win it. Samuel's boarding house stood on a quiet corner 12th and C Street. It was small, filled with creaking stairs and peeling wallpaper. On the 5th day after Elias vanished, Samuel came home to find his door ajar. Nothing was missing, but everything had been moved. His books had been rearranged, his socks folded too neatly, his drawer handles polished. It wasn't theft, it was a message. We were here. We could have taken more. Samuel's breath caught. He knew the floorboard hiding Elias's note fragment hadn't been touched, but the threat hung thick in the air. Later that night, there was a knock. An older woman stood at his doorstep, clutching a worn envelope. Her eyes were hollow, her clothes threadbare, but her hands shook with something between fear and duty. "I was told to give this to the boy who worked with Elias," she said. Samuel opened it after she left. Inside was a sketch, Elias's handwriting, a crude map, a building marked in red on the outskirts of town, and a single phrase beneath it: "He knew, and now they know he knew." Samuel didn't sleep that night. He began planning instead. The next morning, beneath a gray sky and the scent of rain, Samuel followed the map. The building was real, an abandoned carriage warehouse near the Potomac, once used for wartime transport, now left to rot. Ivy clung to its bricks, and windows stared blank like blind eyes. Samuel entered quietly, ducking under beams and stepping around broken planks. Dust clouded the air. At the back, near an old furnace, he found it. A box, wooden, locked with a rusted clasp. He cracked it open with a nearby crowbar. Inside were dozens of pages, Telegraph transcripts coded letters, memos, and signed. Some bore the watermark of the Treasury, others the War Department, but all shared a single theme. They spoke of a plot, a convergence of Confederate sympathizers, rogue federal agents, and political extremists. A date, April 14th, was circled on 3 documents. Another note mentioned the name Booth. Samuel's hands trembled. Someone inside the government was coordinating something, and Elias had stumbled onto it. Then Samuel heard the door creak. He ducked. Boots entered the warehouse. He wasn't alone. Samuel's heart pounded. He ducked behind crates as 2 figures moved through the warehouse. One of them, tall and thick-shouldered, wore a dark bowler hat and carried a cane he didn't need. The other, lean and quiet, scanned the shadows with the patience of a hound. "I'm telling you," the man in the bowler hat growled. "If the Finch boy left anything behind, it's here. The watcher wants it cleaned up before Friday." Friday, April 14th. Samuel held his breath, clutching the box tight to his chest. Dust shifted above him. One of the men turned sharply, shining a lantern near the crates. But Samuel had already slipped into a crawl space between the furnace and the wall. He waited for what felt like hours. Eventually, the men left, cursing into the wind. When Samuel emerged, his shirt was soaked, his hands blistered, but his eyes were set. He had only 3 days. 3 days to stop whatever was coming. 3 days to save the president. Back in his room, Samuel spread the documents across the floor, careful to lock his door and stuff towels under the cracks. He lit a single lamp and began decoding the references with Elias's old cipher notebook, which he had copied weeks earlier as a curiosity. Every page unraveled something new. Conversations between operatives, schedules for theater attendance, and surveillance notes on Lincoln's movements. And one line that struck Samuel cold. "Booth is confirmed for forwards." Friday. Curtain time, 8 o'clock. Samuel stood. He knew now what Elias had known, and he faced the same choice. Deliver the letter and risk disappearing like Elias, or vanish quietly and let history unfold in silence? But unlike Elias, Samuel had one advantage. He knew how it would end, unless he rewrote it. He gathered the pages, sealed them in a fresh envelope, and tucked it into the lining of his coat. By sunrise, he would be knocking on the president's door. But in the shadows behind him, someone was already following.